Hello, I'm here to present our paper on dimensions of assisted digital access, where we look at how voluntary and third sector organisations are assisting people who are digitally excluded access essential everyday digital services. Voluntary and third sector organisations are becoming increasingly important in the assistance of digital access. The assistance is often informal and not recognised by the digital provider. In this picture here, we see two people on a sofa sharing a tablet, talking about what's on the tablet screen. And we can imagine that one of those individuals is assisting the other person to access a service or explain what's going on with the service. And in this paper, we capture some of the dimensions of that assistance. We look at what makes such assistance safe and secure, and we set out a positive first security strategy that will support that assistance, not only in terms of protecting the data and the technology, but also importantly, protecting and looking after the well-being of those who are both providing assistance and who are being assisted. The literature for this has its roots in the early 2000s, a sociological literature that looked at digital access as a nuanced pattern of interactions and practices between people and technology. And also looked at the social envelope, the networks of formal and informal support that wrapped around an individual to help them access technology. HCI has really helped to expand this understanding, looking at the situated nature of assisted access and looking at how mainstream and assisted technologies can help shape a digital access for those that needs assistance. And also how this assisted access takes a form of a relational service, where it's not a prescribed service, but where both parties work out the needs of the other and look at how best to deliver that assistance. We often think about security in this case as the form of usable and accessible access control. In this picture, we see here two cogs representing a system and a dial with yes and no representing access control. Yes, absolutely, we need to make sure that access to that access control is usable and accessible security studies do a good job of that. But we also need to consider the logic underpinning it. Under what conditions can we move to yes or can we move to no? And is that logic accessible? Is it understandable? And we also need to consider not only the protection of the technology and the data, but we also need to consider the well-being of the individual that's using it. That doesn't just mean protection from data threats or digital threats. It also means ensuring the well-being of that individual so that they benefit from the realization of access to that service. They're able to go about their lives free from fear, accessing the services that they need to. And in social and political theories of security, that's often referred to as a form of positive security. So to explore this, we ran two focus groups with 5 voluntary and third sector organisations. We were still constrained by the pandemic at that time, so we decided to run the focus group over Zoom. We decided to work with voluntary and third sector organisations and understand assisted access from their perspective initially, because we felt that they would probably be most comfortable using that type of engagement. And we wanted to, in this focus group, understand how these voluntary and third sector organisations provide digital assistance and how the assister and the assisted are secured during this interaction. We co-designed the study with representatives from 2 community groups. That meant that we co-created a provocation that asked people to think of stories of assisted access, either from the perspective of those providing the assistance or those being assisted. By using the form of story, enabled participants to think of how they could perhaps create a story from a number of different events or incidents, rather than feeling that they had to just relate one particular event that they could think of. And then we sent out the provocation in advance to participants to give them a bit of comfort and reassurance about what we were going to ask them during the focus group. On the day, we introduced the activity using Zoom, and then we split the focus group into smaller subgroups. We used Padlet boards, a type of online collaging, to collect the different input. We used scribes to collate the stories, And then the participants could view them and edit them or work with the scribe to edit them. This way, everything was very transparent, very open. All the data was clearly and visibly collected. We then put the groups back together into one large focus group, and we had a plenary session where we discussed the themes that had emerged. So our findings. What emerged from our findings was a positive first security strategy, where the assisted and the assisters came together in safety and security in a number of different ways. So first of all, the assisters ensured that they provided clear and easy access to internet and computer technology. They found that often people who needed to be assisted were very worried, felt insecure because they didn't have the kind of computers, didn't have the network connectivity, didn't have the data. So the first thing was that the assisters got rid of that worry by making sure that they provided a stable platform. Second was that the assisters did knowledge transfer to develop some know-how capabilities with those who were being assisted. That also included data protection skills. This is partly so that people could then in future access the services by themselves if they wished, but also so that they could be active co-pilots, actively understanding what was being done on their behalf and ask questions if needed. Next, it was important to build trust relations with the communities, and that enabled them to sustain a high quality of assistance. And that was underpinned by clear allocation of responsibilities, that not only the assisters but also the assisted had responsibility to make sure that the services were set up and carried out correctly, and also that it was clear what the goals were of those providing the assistance, so that there was reassurance that the well-being of the assisted were at the heart of everything that was being done. And then finally, assisters and assisted very much came together fighting on the same side for the same goals. And that was reinforced with empathy and reliability in care, where the assisters were ensured that they were a listening ear. They were always there to listen to the concerns of those being assisted, that they were always there, that they were reliable and consistent, and that all the support they gave was given from a position of care. Having done the analysis, having looked at our findings, we also have some design principles that we recommend. Vouching, enabling an individual to nominate someone else that could vouch their identity and help them set up a service, so that the assisted has the control, has the power to vouch for somebody as a good assister. Accessible interfaces and processes. Not only must the digital technologies and services be accessible, but so too must the processes underpinning it. Support for dual use. By default, essential services need to have support for dual use so that assistance can happen by default. And then finally, the e-safety guidance needs to recognise that there are networks of support that enable people to access services and to provide e-safety guidance for that network. So thank you. That brings us to the end. I'd like to also say thank you to Alice Angus for the illustrations that we've used in this presentation.